Peter and I have been looking, as you know, at the issues that are facing us as a nation at this very moment. None is more important than energy policy, though. With bushfires raging and dust storms threatening, we have again undeniable proof of the importance of harvesting water to drought-proof our country. On energy, we've got a schizophrenic approach. One bloke who isn't schizophrenic is the Queensland Senator Matt Canavan. But only today we've got the Australian energy market operator boss, Audrey Zibelman, telling us that new measures are needed to extend the life of coal-fired power plants to ensure security of supply. Last year, the same outfit, the Australian energy market operator, told us that coal would be the cheapest electricity for the next 20 years. The CEO of the Australian energy market operator, Audrey Zibelman, is a renewable energy zealot, which confirms that everything in energy policy seems to be contradictory. In spite of what Audrey Zibelman is saying, no one apart from Senator Canavan seems to be prepared to stand up and say, we have to have coal-fired power now and well into the future. The Paris Agreement contradicts any commitment to coal. Affordability contradicts the obsession with solar and wind. And every other day, coal is demonised, renewables are subsidised, and electricity is dearer. Rod Sims from the ACCC said last year, we need more coal-fired power. That's not what governments of Victoria, Queensland and the ACT are saying. Even the Liberal government in New South Wales talks about transitioning to renewables. I don't even know what that means. Bjorn Lomborg is one of the world authorities on this whole issue of climate change and our response to it. He believes in climate change, but he said only recently, the reality is today, solar and wind energy together deliver only about 1% of global energy. The International Energy Agency, he said, estimates that even by 2040, these, that's solar and wind, will cover little more than 4% of global energy. Wrote Bjorn Lomborg, one of the world's leading energy researchers, Czech-Canadian Vaclav Smil, has said, quote, the great hope for a quick and sweeping transition to renewable energy is wishful thinking, said Bjorn Lomborg. Former US Vice President Al Gore's chief scientific advisor, Jim Hansen, who put global warming on the agenda back in 1988, agreed, saying, quote, suggesting renewables will let us phase rapidly off fossil fuels in the United States, China, India or the world as a whole is the equivalent of believing in the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. Yet politicians, not Matt Canavan, keep saying we're going to transition away from coal to renewable energy. Again, Bjorn Lomborg makes the point. It's a couple of weeks ago, quote, this year the world will spend $230 billion subsidising renewable energy and supporting middle-class homeowners to erect solar panels. In addition, he said, the Paris Agreement on climate change will cost the world from US $1 trillion to US $2 trillion a year by 2030. He writes, astonishingly, neither of these huge and expensive policies will have any measurable impact on temperatures. He wrote, our response to climate change is so expensive because alternative energy sources remain expensive and inefficient. He said, it's still very expensive to switch from fossil fuels, hence the fortune being spent on subsidies is to little overall effect. Despite costing a fortune, says Lomborg, the Paris Agreement will have virtually no impact on global temperatures. So we're going to send our country broke, put us into energy poverty, turn all the lights off and suffer blackouts in the coming summer, pursuing some ideological dream which is based on a hoax that carbon dioxide is destroying the planet and therefore ban coal-fired power. Well, Matt Canavan grew up in Logan, just south of Brisbane. He's got a first-class honours degree in economics from the University of Queensland. He worked at the Productivity Commission, where he rose to the level of director. He was chief of staff to Barnaby Joyce ahead of the 2010 election. He helped develop policies to provide tax concessions for vital infrastructure and to encourage people to move into the regions. He developed a coalition report on the potential to invest in new dams throughout Australia. God knows what's happened to that. And in 2013, he was elected to the Senate. He lives in Yeppoon, near Rockhampton. He's got 4 sons and a baby daughter, and he talks sense. And to hear some of that sense, he joins us. Matt Canavan, good evening. Thank you for your time.
Evening to you, Alan, and to Peter. How are you going?
Can I just raise with you before we get on to any of that, this business about bushfires? I mean, it's an absolute mess at the moment. You actually, there's a picture on the screen here, if I might just throw this up, Matt Canavan, where here is a farm, a property. I think I've got it somewhere here. There we are. Now, there's a place that's in the middle of the bushfires, burnt out, but that farmer defied the Queensland government and implemented burn backs and fire breaks, which are illegal in Queensland, that place survived. Now, Matt, last December, you spent 3 days with bushfire victims, and you talked about the Queensland government's restrictions on backburning and clearing. Are we any closer to getting some sense in all of this?
Well, the news is not good from Queensland at the moment, Alan, on that front. You're right, I was up there. Those fires came right into almost Rockhampton through Gracemere, and you know, what I believe in these sort of circumstances is we should listen to those on the ground that have to fight these fires and put their livelihoods and homes at risk. Too often our policies in these areas are determined and dictated to by people who shuffle papers in offices in major cities and are themselves unlikely ever to face the Armageddon that can be a fire front. And so when I was in Miriam Vale, the Miriam Vale Evacuation Centre, a whole lot of people there from Deepwater and Baffle Creek who had been forced from their homes. Almost everyone to a man came up to us. I was there with the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack. Almost everybody came up to us and said, the reason we're all here is because we haven't been able to put in fire breaks, to do cold burns and reduce fire risk. And the Queensland government, in particular, has put their lives at risk. Now, there is some hope, Alan, because the Queensland government commissioned a report by their Inspector General after those terrible fires last year. It reported only a couple of months ago and made a specific recommendation that the Queensland government's vegetation management laws should be reassessed to allow more flexibility for local landowners to reduce their fire risk. And the Queensland government has put their head in the sand, is refusing to do anything on that front because the reason they have clamped down on vegetation management in Queensland is because they needed preferences from the Greens at the last state election. The next state election is only 15 months away, and they need them again, so they're unlikely to change these things. I just think it's an absolute disgrace.
Can I just take you to the other half of that equation? Because in Western Queensland, as you're aware, there's a farmer, Dan McDonald, who chose to keep his cattle alive by feeding them his mulga. He bought the land, it's mulga land, he bought it. He has been prosecuted and is facing a $110,000 fine under the same vegetation laws. I mean, isn't someone in Canberra capable of doing something about this?
Well, look, these are state laws, Alan. They're not something the federal government can itself regulate or change laws regarding them. But we do need a change of approach there in Queensland because effectively the Queensland government's changes to the Vegetation Management Act there have outlawed farming. That's what they do. There's actually a provision in that act which says if you want to develop irrigated farming, that's outlawed in certain areas. It's against the law to grow food in Queensland now in some areas because of these laws. We need to prosecute these with the public, Alan. They need to be changed at the ballot box in Queensland and make sure that we never have laws like this introduced again.
Coal-fired power. Come on, what can you tell us? When is someone going to announce they're going to build another coal-fired power station and stop just talking rhetoric?
Well, Alan, it's there is progress. There's progress. It's actually Clean Coal Day today in Japan. They celebrate coal over there because it provides them energy security, cheap power, and drives their manufacturing industry. And over there in Japan right now is a gentleman called Ashley Dodd, who is an Aboriginal elder, in fact, from the Biri Nation. And he wants to build a coal-fired power station at Collinsville, which is just west of Townsville in North Queensland. He's got agreements already with land and access to coal at the Collinsville coal mine, some of the best coal in the world. He's talking to customers there, particularly those around the refining industry in Townsville. We've got a lot of great metals in Queensland that come out of, or minerals that come out of the northwest minerals province around Mount Isa. Some of them go to Townsville refinement into metals, but if we don't have cheap power in the future, we're going to lose that and we'll just export the rocks. So he's working with them to sustain that industry, and we've provided the federal election $10 million for him to develop his business case. That should be complete in the next year.
But is that coal for us or for Japan?
He's got the drive.
Is that coal for us or for Japan?
That's to develop a coal-fired power station in Collinsville.
For us.
To build a coal-fired power station in Collinsville to feed power to Townsville to support their industry and jobs. Because what really concerns me, Alan, is we are going to kill our manufacturing industry unless something is done about this. And you mentioned the concerns that Audrey has raised recently. If we don't act and get some common sense back into this, I'm confident we'll still have a resources sector because we have the high quality coal and gas and minerals, but they'll all get shipped overseas as rocks. when we should be converting some of that energy, some of that minerals into more value-added metals and metallurgy, having the high professional, high qualification jobs in factories here in Australia. But you can't do that if you don't have energy. The rocks will go overseas for that processing, and that'll be a big missed opportunity for Australia.
And you're absolutely right, Matt. We'll end up being a quarry with no jobs for anyone here beyond just that exploration and early construction phase, because we know there's not the same amount of jobs when we're actually taking it out of the ground at the end phase and setting it offshore. I listened to what Alan said about Audrey Zebelman. She's been obviously mugged by reality because she was on the other side of the argument for a long time. I don't think she's turned the corner. I think she's just being mugged by reality. I think she's still a true believer. We heard comments from Catherine Tanner the other day from Energy Australia in a similar vein to say, you know, basically we've got to sort of turn this around. We've got to put back in baseload power into the system. I know that you are a good guy. I have sat through many meetings where you have fought the fight. I just want to know that you are winning it, Matt, inside the cabinet room with some of the others that have perhaps not been on board, let's say, to be kind, for a long time. Are you winning the war internally to actually get stuff happening in energy despite all the lovely promises and nice rhetoric? Are we going to see a change?
Well, I think, Peter, over the past year, the Prime Minister has made very clear that the priority is to get lower prices, and Angus is doing a great job in that respect to deliver that. We have lowered retail prices for the first time since the carbon tax was removed through changes to regulation in retail markets. It's provided some relief, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, but there is more to do.
Are we going to see something built, Matt? Are we going to see something built?
Well, that's why we're supporting these. That's why we're supporting projects like the Collinsville one. That's why we have announced some initial upgrades to coal-fired power stations, which can be done quicker and sooner to provide, again, some extra supply.
But Matt,
in terms of
Matt, there is commercial blackmail going on at the moment, and you build the cat. You recently addressed the Global Management Upper Spencer Gulf Conference at Port Pirie, and you called out members of the mining industry for not, quote, standing up to the bullies and cowards in the green movement. Your words, and I mean, banks are in the same boat here. They won't lend to people who want to build a coal-fired power station. And you lashed out at an engineering and mining contract, this Oricon. Now, it's a bit of a night of swearing here, but forgive me, Matt Canavan does have some colourful language from time to time, but he belled the cat when he told these people that they were, quote, weak as piss after they cut ties with Adani because they were targeted by anti-coal activists. Now, Matt, to take Peter's point, the joint's full of these anti-coal activists. Is our government tough enough to stand up to them?
Well, that's why government. That's one of the reasons I think why government has to be involved here to push a little, and that's why we've got that funding to fund upgrades at coal and gas-fired power stations, as well as the funding I mentioned to the Collinsville power station. We've got to lead here a little bit and pull people along with us. But yeah, we do. It's very frustrating sometimes, Alan, where people from the business sector will come in and say something in a closed room, but out in the public, they become very shy. And sometimes I feel like wanting to swap jobs with them, because I don't necessarily think standing up at an AGM and saying to your shareholders that coal is our nation's biggest export, and it'd be mad to move away from it. But it wouldn't be good for business for our country to move away from it. I don't think that's such a hard thing to say. It's transparent, it's common sense, it's easy, and it's a message the Australian people got at the election.
But you've got people gluing themselves to the streets in Brisbane and seemingly getting away with it.
Yeah.
What?
The problem is, Alan, the Greens have done a very good job, or the Green activists and the Greens Party have done a very good job of taking a very small number of people in the scheme of things and making it seem like, amplifying their voice and making it seem like they represent millions of people. So when you go on Twitter, and I'm sure if I went on my Twitter feed now, there's probably not that many people on Twitter listening to this show, but they'd be just reams of abuse, right, about your position, my position, Peter's position, etc., right? And so a lot of these corporate entities, they have teams of people who follow these social media feeds and suddenly get very scared, thinking that there's somehow groundswell of opposition to things like coal or cheap power out there in the community. When we saw at the election, that was all, the emperor had no clothes. It was very clear that they
we've got to do something.
They all only get one vote. Doesn't matter how many fake Twitter accounts you open, you still only get one vote.
But see, you said, we'll end here, you said if we are to export coal to the world, And this is what out there in listener land they're saying, why shouldn't we use some of it to provide affordable and reliable power to Australians? I know you've said it, is Scott Morrison, Frydenberg, Frydenberg's got all these green people in his electorate, they're going to stand up and say unapologetically, the world of tomorrow can't survive without coal-fired power, full stop, like it or lump it.
Well, we're investing in all these types of power sources, Alan, and there's a role for investment in renewable energy as well, which has occurred, but we've done a lot of that. We've just got to return to common sense, and I think that's what's happened. And I talk to Audrey all the time. She's trying to do her best. She's got to deal with crazy state governments like Victoria who ban gas in their whole state and want to shut down their industrial heartland.
She's a renewable energy zealot. She's a renewable energy zealot.
Just look at the common sense. Well, she's
common
making
sense
sense
in the
paper today. So let's get it. Let's get it aligned.
Let's take it where we can get it. Let's take it where we can get it.
And we don't have the luxury, Alan, of limiting our support base here. And the common sense is, since the Hazelwood power station shut, it's 25% of Victoria's electricity supply, a big coal-fired power station. It shut immediately. Straight after that, I can show you the graphs. It happened the next month, effectively. The wholesale power prices of Victoria went up by 160%. Right?
Matt, let me just jump in there. Remember the Labor Minister...
You can't argue with that.
Remember the Labor Minister at the time, Lily D'Ambrosio, said it would be something like only a $9 or so increase for the year, right? She was so wrong that this is all built on a lie.
Malcolm Turnbull wouldn't lift a finger to keep Hazelwood open. Matt, we've run out of time. You keep talking, we'll keep talking. Hopefully we'll get there. We're very, very grateful for you sharing all of that with us, and I hope we can do it again.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Peter.
Not at all. There he is. Hope at the side, that bloke, but he's in the Senate. Wheel him down to the lower house.
Well, at least he sits around the cabinet table. We know we pulled him out of an expenditure review committee meeting tonight.
We did.
That was a budget meeting. That's where they carve up all of your money. But it was very good of him to turn up.
Absolutely.
And he turns up all the time fighting the fight. Like, when have you heard a politician walk into a room of business and give them that sort of language?
Absolutely. Nail them.